Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, although this is an audio-only podcast, today's guest, Cory Hymel, Director of Blockchain at Gigster, has the coolest background I have ever seen, and I've done nearly 2,000 interviews. There are so many geeky toys, gadgets, even a few PBLs, aka Pretty Blue Lights, that all had me mesmerised while we were talking. But best of all, he's just a super cool guy too, and he's officially been added to the cool guys I'd like to share a beer with, and maybe design a lightsaber with too. But more on that story later, because Cory is the Web3 blockchain NFT pro at Gigster, and I want to tap into his areas of expertise around Web3, blockchain, NFTs, and most importantly, how companies can tap into these technologies and how they can deploy talented teams to execute on that. But I don't want to reveal too much, so buckle up and hold on tight as I beam your ears all the way to North Carolina, where Cory is waiting to speak with us today. So, a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Cory Hymel. I'm the Director of Blockchain at Gigster, and we are the leading service integrator for all things Web3. We've been in the space since 2019. I've done a bunch of really cool stuff. I myself got into blockchain around 2018, was out in San Francisco when it was, a lot of it was hitting at the time, and a lot of the culture was growing. But, my background's in embedded systems engineering, and have started and exited a few different companies, took some time off to grow personally and travel, and then have, been with Gigster for probably like 6 years now. Lead up all of our Web3 practice and projects.
Awesome, incredibly cool. And I'm conscious we will have people listening from your own community, checking out what you've got to say, but also we'll have people listening, hearing about Gigster for the first time. So for those, can you just set the scene and offer an overview of what Gigster is and the kind of problems that you set out to solve for your customers?
Yeah. So we were founded on this idea that the future is distributed, right? Yeah. And this was 9 years ago, so pre-COVID. So our founders had some crystal ball to see where we would end up now. And they said, well, there's two things we want to do. We want to build emerging tech, and we want to build this and enable this distributed nature. So if we want to do that, what do we need to do to make that successful? And the take on it was, we need to build research and tooling into how to enable and set distributed engineering teams, in our case, up for success. So over the years, we've been investing heavily into research and tooling. I actually also manage our academic partnerships with Stanford and Berkeley around the distributed future and really like cognitively how distributed teams work. So at the end of the day, like Gigster is really a data company, and we're a data company on people. We just happen to build software, and Gigster itself, I think from the outside looking in is, a kind of fully managed, emerging tech development house. So we work with a lot of large brands, on the Web3 side to help build like multi-year Web3 strategies, understand like where the market's going, how to implement those over time, and then provide the underlying resources to actually build those. But we do it in a very managed fashion, right? So we are very close, and we see a lot of these projects go from inception all the way to production, which is fascinating to see because you can see a lot of the evolution of how the tech has changed, how the perception of the tech has changed, how enterprises are looking at Web3 differently, from 2018 when I was, knocking on doors saying, hey, we should do blockchain. And everyone's like, yeah, maybe not, it sounds cool, but not yet to early 2021 with the Cambrian explosion of NFTs. So all of a sudden now enterprises are like, hey, Cory, we're interested now. I'm like, oh, great. Well, let me tell you how to do this.
Oh man, incredibly cool. And of course, there is so much excitement around Web3 at the moment. And if we look at any tech trend throughout history, the success of any technology is always determined by the adoption. So I'm curious, what emerging trends are you seeing for mass adoption and early execution for enterprises in this space?
Mm-hmm. And that's a great question. You had a good couple words in there. So the guiding philosophy of why, for all intents and purposes, Gigster's on the earth right now, is to drive mass adoption of blockchain. We firmly believe that the future is decentralized, the ability to own your identity and monetize on your actions in the digital space and be able to facilitate this new world and these new asset classes is the future of where the world's going. And if you take a step back and, the lens that we look at it from is, again, as you said, mass adoption. As of right now, I think the last time I checked, there's something like 60 million, active Web3 wallets. There's, 7 billion something people on the planet. Like we are in the very, very early stages of all that, and that having that perspective because of the amount of like media hype and stuff that's out there. Everyone thinks that the install base and really the whole thing is much larger than it is. But if really what we're seeing, especially from the enterprises side, when they're trying to target their existing customer bases or install bases, there's a lot of education that has to be done there. And when we talk about emerging trends to drive mass adoption, there's definitely a few different like friction points that I think are being solved kind of in real time, right? That the most critical one right now that we see a lot is around how to handle wallets. How do you handle purchase processing? I would say like 4 months ago, trying to go and buy an NFT for someone that's not crypto native is really difficult, right? And there's even like the first two steps is one, you've got to educate them that these digital assets have value, right? That's really tough in and of itself. Yeah. And let's say that you do that. And now you're like, all right, great. You want to participate. Now go buy it. You're going to need to go sign up for an account here. Make sure you write down your wallet, words and your key phrase. And if you lose it, you're kind of you're game over. And then we need you to go buy some ETH or Bitcoin over here and then transfer it here. And then you can purchase and you have to pay a transaction fee. And depending on what time of day, that might be more or less. But here, all of that just really put this huge barrier from adoption. Like a concrete wall in between people being convinced to actually participating. And that is really starting to break down. There's a lot of great companies out there that are providing, these custodial wallets and, like Wire, for instance, and others are providing being able to purchase with a credit card. Again, it's that kind of, if I saw, my mom going to purchase an NFT 4 months ago, it never would have happened. But now, you can go, you can get a similar workflow to like purchasing on Amazon, right? And that first friction point getting removed is like the first unlock to mass adoption. And that's going to unlock that next portion of the adoption curve from the extremely, extremely early adopters to the, I would say like near term early adopters. And then eventually that growth curve goes up. And that's one of the big ones that we've seen lately.
And even just logging on Twitter at the moment, you get the NFT prompt straight away, which is going to bring more people on board, right?
And Instagram, is looking to pilot some of theirs there. And it's starting to get much more pervasive kind of across the board. And it's an interesting kind of parallel to draw also with history is that, I think when blockchain came out, there was all of these promises about how it's going to revolutionize internal enterprises, right? It's going to revolutionize your business, revolutionize supply chain. And it didn't really live up, I think, to the hype. And what I've seen is very similar to in the past is that I was fortunate enough to be on early with mobile tech when it really started to grow with like the first iPhone out and the whole like BYOD, bring your own device. Mm-hmm. The enterprises, a lot of the enterprises because I used to do enterprise strategy for enterprise mobile strategy with a lot of, some of the Fortune 500s is that internally they were like, oh no, don't have a cell phone. We're doing stuff here. Like you can't have apps, you don't need to do an app. And then the retail market really adopted it. And next thing you know, the enterprise is like, oh, now we can start to use this because people are familiar. And it's the same curve that we're seeing with blockchain is that it was supposed to start an enterprise. Now the retail market's really driving on, and now enterprises from an internal perspective are also starting to look at it beyond just a new customer engagement channel, but also a lot of new internal optimization strategies around it.
And if we were to take one area of Web3, such as NFTs, and we've got a business leader listening, how can enterprises prepare and create a roadmap for an NFT marketplace development project? Where do they even begin?
That's a fantastic question, and there's a couple different areas to take. I was chatting with one of my buddies, Richard Walker, who's the principal blockchain over at Deloitte, about asking, what are some guidance that you have? And he answered it kind of interesting. My background in engineering immediately goes to the tech side, right? Like, think about your wallet, think about your chain, this kind of thing. But his first one that really struck me was that if you're an enterprise and you're looking to move into Web3, one of the first things that you really have to take a step back and look at is your enterprise and is your culture set up to really do new things and try stuff, right? And try emerging tech that potentially might have some hiccups. And we see this a lot with large historic brands, right? We're working with brands for Web3 that have been around 100 plus years, and they've got their stuff down to a science. Like internally, that whenever they go out customer facing, they have a very high probability that this will hit to some degree. And they're not, they don't see kind of that like try and fail mentality somewhat. So anytime I talk to a new enterprise, I'm like, look, one of the first things you should do is make sure that internally you're set up and you're okay with trying something new like this and being okay with a degree of not failure, but things maybe not going exactly as they always do for you. From there, moving into starting to understand like what your customer base is. One of the great things about, in this example, NFTs, is that you are able to actually target new and different market segments that you may not have been before. And we see a lot of large enterprises basically wanting and looking at Web3 and specifically NFTs outwardly for four main reasons. One is to engage with new market segments. Two is to have new high margin revenue streams. Three is to be able to offer new experiences that are able to couple or piggyback with their existing product offerings. And four, the reason why a lot of them are wanting to get into it now is a lot around this concept of like brand and risk control in the digital, right? Web3 is the Wild West. And anyone, there's not really much stopping me from going on to OpenSea and creating a Nike NFT collection and putting it up for sale and like seeing what happens. The way that enterprises are, and what they see as the upside of getting in now, is that you can build your credibility and your brand, stake of authenticity in the metaverse, metaverse, in the metaverse now. And that's a lot of the reasons why we see people getting in now, and why CTOs and CEOs are super interested in the near term.
And to further bring this topic to life, I know this is something that you're very passionate about. Can you expand on how to gamify NFTs for better profits, especially in various retail industries? Because it's something we're seeing more and more of, isn't it?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because one of the worst things that any business or brand or project or individual can do is to look at NFTs as quick cash, and not really put in thought that, hey, you are offering your customers a non-degradable product that's going to be around forever. And so when we think about how to design NFTs and NFT strategy for long-term growth and value, it's looking at, and this is a huge mental mind shift from traditional like consumerism markets and development, is that in the consumer market now, products, there's a shelf life to everything, right? Products degrade, things are designed to fail over time. I mean, I think we all know how frustrating it is when your iPhone gives out for a couple of years, seemingly overnight. It's this design with a lifetime expectancy, but NFTs are way different, right? Like they don't degrade, they don't wear down. No matter how many times they change hands, they're not going anywhere. But what they do act as a great base layer and foundation to offer this new kind of cumulative growth value over the lifetime of the product to your customers. Whenever I talk to enterprises, I'm like, look, we've got to look over the next, month to month for the next 12 months, and then look at where we want to be with this in 5 years. And if we can put together a very compelling value add over that period of time, the probability of you being successful is extremely high. I don't want to say guaranteed. Legal will get in trouble or will get mad at me. But your probability of success is really good. So how to design it is really thinking about how to create that cumulative value for these underlying assets consistently over time. Which is it's a hard mental shift. It's not easy. Like by no means is it easy. Like talked to a lot of great industry leading product people, and it's just they kind of twist the noodle a little bit.
And if we zoom out to another area in Web3, if we look at blockchain, what do you think is the key to blockchain mass adoption? Because it does feel like we've been talking about this for 5 years or more. And although we're on the cusp of something, and I think we can all feel it, it's still not quite there, is it?
It's so close. But again, it's one of those things where it's all about perspective. And that's the great up and down of having a lot of media coverage and hype around it. The Satoshi published, the first blockchain, and in 2009, here we are, what is it, 9, 10, 12, 13 years later, arguably the tech didn't even really get noticed, I would say, until maybe 2017, late 2017 with CryptoKitties from Dapper. So if we round that up to say 2018, we're really only like 4 years in, and to see how far it's come with from where Bitcoin is to what Ethereum did and is doing to what these like layer 2 chains are able to accomplish to reduce gas fees and increase the number of transaction throughput. Like all of these were barriers to growth. And if I look at some of the keys to mass adoption, there's obviously the underlying tech side, right? So solving the gas crisis. Yeah. And there's a lot of great projects like Scale Network is one that's super interesting, where it's like zero gas costs, the way they're built on top of EVM and Ethereum. The transaction throughput's incredibly high. And when you start to enable that, the number of different applications like opens up wildly. From there, after the tech side, right, there's obviously looking at like the user adoption things that would hinder mass market growth in the space. And we mentioned it before, right? Like how tough it is to manage your wallets, the purchasing friction. And there's a little bit of that next chasm of adoption around the idea of like tokenized physical and digital assets and how to educate and bring people in more and more. And as that keeps rolling, I think that the adoption and growth curve of the tech is significantly faster than like AI and machine learning was. Like I was fortunate enough to be around kind of not in the super early days, but when it was the hot commodity and topic, and to see how long that took to get there versus how long it took to get to kind of the next, and I say like mass market for AI and stuff like that was when Google started offering off the shelf machine learning models, when you could just one click, get your model, it's there, anyone can do it. And then it just kind of ballooned from there. And that was 20, 25 years in the making. So the fact that we're 4 years in, like I always try to push people, like patience is the hardest thing these days with how fast information and content comes out.
It really is. And you mentioned something there, gas fees. And I think as users, the community at large is often divided and polarized, and people cheering on for their coin like it's their favorite football team. But I think one thing that can unite everyone and get everyone on board with is that everyone's just concerned about the cost of the gas fees there. So can you tell me more about why blockchain-based businesses should be concerned about high gas fees and what they can do to avoid them too?
This is an interesting one, right? It's the reason that gas is there, right? And I think it's helpful for people to know why it exists in order, before running around it, is that it originally was there to help from basically like spamming the network. So if you have this completely decentralized thing with no central like regulatory of inbound and outbound messages to keep people from just spamming wildly transactions out to the network, if you add some level of skin in the game to submit a transaction, you automatically kind of help protect against these mass attacks. And then also, there's gas there to pay the people to run the blockchain or run the world computer. So there's the reasoning behind it. It makes sense. And in the early days, the gas was fair, in my opinion, right? But as we continue to look at growth beyond that, the number of transactions and things that need to happen to facilitate user experiences that people are used to, we do have to solve that, right? And so if we're looking at the big negative effect for businesses, right, or enterprises looking to sell and do blockchain-based business, it disincentivizes people to interact with their product, right? Yeah. If I say, hey man, you want to buy this t-shirt? And you're like, yeah. I'm like, but it's like a $25 credit card fee. You're probably gonna be like, I don't think I want to do that. Yeah. And so for businesses, right, we always look at like layer 2 chains, stuff on top. You've got, I mentioned them before, but like Scale, but you've got your Polygons, your Solana, like a bunch of your other ones out there that have significantly lower ones to get around. And then, just managing that cost and offering products where it justifies what the transaction fees will be. But I think the gas problem is being solved quickly.
It is, with there's so many different solutions. But do you think there'll ever be a gasless future or a reduced gasless future on the Ethereum blockchain? It's a big one, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, so my prediction and like where the future is going, and like, they obviously have ETH 2.0 that are coming out that's supposed to, with the proof of stake, reduce some of what those, the intensity costs to do the transactions. Unless there's other mechanics that are put in place, lower level, or I guess to step back is that, so my prediction on the future is that you'll always have Ethereum there as basically like your bottom level record keeping blockchain, right? So everything will kind of roll-ups is a great concept for people to research, but like roll-ups, everything will roll up back down to ETH mainnet. And there should always be some level of a gas fee to that action, right? Because that again promotes non-malicious actors to not put out negative or false transactions. What I do think, and if we say like gasless future, I think that, Ethereum will always have gas, but you will have these layer 2 and potentially layer 3 chains that are able to offer extremely high number of transactions for near zero or next to zero cost. And, if we look at today, like everything you do on the internet has some transaction cost, right? Like you're paying for your internet, right? So you are paying for access and transactions there. And the difference is that you can do a lot of transactions for really cheap. And that, as long as we facilitate that growth trajectory for it, we're going to be in a fine spot, in my opinion.
100% with you on that. And I'm going to throw a slight curveball at you now. As remote work and the global remote workforces continue to define new distributed teams that are empowering the tech innovations that we're all enjoying, how do you see the future of work evolving in the future of Web3?
That's one of the areas that I am most interested in these days. And I'm glad that you asked. And it does a lot of the research that we're doing, with the university partners. My projection is that in the future, the concept of what a company means is going to drastically change. My thought is that in the future of work, is there's going to have, what I'm calling like elastic companies, and these are kind of a evolution of DAOs. So DAOs are incredibly interesting, right? And so people don't know, like, so decentralized autonomous organizations are Web3 based. You can think of as Web3 based companies that have a group of people that come together that have a common goal. And then they're able to create an incentive structure that motivates and provides value and returns for people that want to help move the idea or move the mission forward. And these structures work incredibly well if you need to move quickly, if you need to organize people quickly, if you need to work towards a very common goal. and if you need to incentivize people to create tasks. And we saw this be really successful, like Constitution DAO, right? Came together, they got 47 million or 27 million, like really quickly to buy a version of the Constitution. The Ukrainian DAO came together in a matter of days to raise a ton of cash for Ukraine. And then once that goal is reached, you just kind of dissolve. And I have this really inkling notion that in the future, rather than the concept and notion of creating companies that like with the motivation that we will be here for forever, that companies and these organizations, I don't even know if I want to call them companies, but these organizations will come together to say, hey, we have this very pointed goal we want to do, and we want to do it in a year. And at the end of the year, if we don't succeed, we dissolve. Or if we do succeed, then we dissolve as well. Or that migrates into a new one. And it facilitates this concept of short attention spans that I think new generations are having, and the idea and the comfortability of doing fractional work. And I think that like Uber and all of these companies really broke the mold when they said, hey, actually people are okay working on demand and working when they want to do. And there's a huge level of freedom that comes with that. So as I look at the future of work, I think the future of, when we say work is going to be defined by what the company structures that people operate under are. And my prediction on those company structures is that you're going to see much more of these spin up and spin down organizations that are going after very targeted goals and success metrics. And then once those are hit or not hit, they dissolve. And it's interesting too, because I posted a poll on LinkedIn the other day about if a company didn't exist after a year, would you think it A, failed, or B, achieved its goals? And 88% said that it failed. Wow. But is that though? Like, what if like me and you started a company and said, look, we want to start a company and over the next year, we want to do 100 podcasts. And if we do that, then we dissolve and we go on to the next one, or we evolve it into something further. Like, who's to say that's wrong from an organizational or, air quotes, company structure? And that drastically changed how we work and how we perceive work, which is a pretty compelling thought.
It sounds to me you need to create an NFT of that poll and then run the same poll 5 years from now. I wonder what the differences will be.
Maybe it'll resell for more than the Jack Dorsey tweet. I don't know.
Well, I love chatting with you today. You brought the subject to life brilliantly. I absolutely loved it. And before I let you go, though, it's time to have a bit of fun with you. I always ask my guests to leave everyone listening with a personal touch of inspiration by sharing either a book that has inspired them or a go-to song that they just listen to get their head in the zone. And we'll add the song to our Spotify playlist or the book to Amazon wishlist. But what are you going to choose today, and what's your story behind that choice?
Yeah, so a book that I love is called The Ascent of Money by Neil Ferguson. And if I'm ever feeling a little bit doubtful about Web3, I just read like the first 2 chapters and I'm like, oh, okay, like this makes sense now. This is okay. So that is my recommendation. I suggest everyone, even if you like, the first 2 chapters are incredible just to learn, because I don't think anyone really knows how the concept of value got transferred into what we think of as money today and how that translates into Web3 and crypto and all of that. So it's a fascinating read.
Well, as we record the podcast today, crypto is having a bit of a crash. So I think I'm going to read the first 2 chapters of that book just to get me inspired again. But thank you so much. But before I let you go, for anyone wanting to find out more information about Gigster, maybe they want to join your community or just find out more information, what's the best starting point for everything?
Yeah, of course. So we have our website, gigster.com. But if you want to reach out to me, I'm on Twitter. It's just my first and last name. We do YouTube live streams and videos. If you want to, it's all educational content on Web3 and how enterprises can adopt it. And then, of course, the LinkedIn thing as well.
Awesome. Well, I think you've dropped so many value bombs today on today's podcast. So thank you so much for taking the time to share that. Also leaving us with a great book and sharing your origin story with us too. But thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
What a super cool guy. And it was just great learning more about the emerging trends for mass adoption and early execution for enterprise impacting tech like NFTs, blockchain and Web3. We hear these buzzwords all the time. But one of the things I love championing on this podcast is, hey, let's talk about early execution. Let's talk about mass adoption. So the fact that Cory is so passionate about this space and getting that message out there, I think it's so important. So if you're new to the world of Web3 and you're a business leader, did it make things a little clearer today? And if you're already deep in the heart of this space, do you have any insights that you'd like to share? As always, email me now, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn at Neil C. Hughes. Keep your messages coming in, insights, questions, pictures to come on the show, whatever it might be. And we'll keep this conversation going. But right now, it's time for me to spin the wheel of misfortune. Today, we talked about Web3. What we're going to talk about tomorrow. It's hard thinking up a different topic and having a different guest every single day of the week. So I'm going to spin it now. Who's it going to be? What subject is it going to be? But I'm afraid you're going to have to join me tomorrow for that one. So a big thank you for listening as always. And until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.